Yeah.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Wednesday Night Live. Tonight we have a very special person, Rabbi Pini, who's flown all the way from here from Los Angeles. Well, not actually flying here, but by Zoom. It's another miracle. Rabbi Pini loves questions, so please ask through the chat button or the electronic hand on the participants button, and we will get to you. Rabbi Dunner hails from a very prominent Germanic rabbinic dynasty that miraculously survived the Holocaust and re-established itself in London. Life is a knowledge expert in antiquarian Hebrew books and manuscripts, and is frequently consulted by libraries, academics, dealers, and private collectors. Rabbi Dunner currently serves as the senior rabbi in Beverly Hills Synagogue and resides in Beverly Hills, California, together with his wife and children. So, Rabbi Pini, the weather must be better over there than it was here. I don't know whether you know, we were flooded out for Sukkot, and quite a few sukkahs have disappeared somewhere. I'm not quite sure where, but I'm sure you were all having a wonderful time. So you were brought up in Jewish Golders Green, and about 10 years ago you moved to America. Can you tell us about your life in London and why and how you finished up in America?
Well, first of all, thank you, David, and thank you to all those who have facilitated tonight's event. I say tonight, for me, it's 12:03, almost lunchtime, but for you, 8 hours later, it's in the evening. And I welcome the opportunity to address all my dear friends in Edgware. I spotted, although I don't see it now on my screen, my friend Danny Weil is watching, so I'm delighted to say hello to him. I haven't spoken to him for a few years, but it's lovely to be able to share my experiences with you and with all the members of the Edgware United community. I moved to Los Angeles in 2011, and the reason I moved is because we were offered an opportunity for me to be the Mashgiach Ruchani, senior member of the faculty at Yeshiva University High School in Los Angeles. And initially the idea was that we would come here for 2 years and I guess come back to London, but it never happened. Here I am still in Los Angeles, now residing in Beverly Hills, where I'm the senior rabbi, as you said, at Beverly Hills Synagogue. It's a Young Israel synagogue. Young Israel is very similar in terms of its reach and its style as the United Synagogue. It's a modern Orthodox group of synagogues that spreads all across the United States, mainly on the East Coast, but there are Young Israels elsewhere. There's quite a few here in Los Angeles. And the Young Israel of North Beverly Hills was established in 1991, a group of people, families who had moved a little bit further north than the main Jewish community in an area that's called Pico Robertson, wanted to establish their own community and eventually built a beautiful synagogue. I'm actually sitting in the building now. This is my office, and not, as David suggested earlier, a false background. I know so many people at Zoom have these false backgrounds. This is actually my office, and the books behind me are real. I can pull them out of the shelf if you want. The Young Israel shul that I'm the rabbi of is about 120 families, mainly empty nesters, as we call them here in the United States, people whose children have moved to the East Coast or elsewhere, but remain in Beverly Hills. It's a very strong community, very charitable, involved in all areas of support of social welfare, Jewish education, and of course the state of Israel. And I'm very proud to be the rabbi of this shul, which is certainly one of the best known synagogues in the United States. So here I am in the United States. I know you said, and it comes from my bio, that I'm here with my family. I live here with my wife and children, but most of my children no longer live in Beverly Hills. We live with 2 children at home. We have one living around the corner with our grandson, and I have another one who lives in an area called San Fernando Valley, which is a suburb of Los Angeles, and he works there. I have one son who's in the IDF. He serves as a lone soldier, Chayal Boded, in the Israel Defense Forces. We're very proud of him. And I have a daughter who I'm going to visit this weekend, who lives in New York. She lives in an area of New York called Fresh Meadows, which I can assure you is neither fresh nor are there any meadows. It's in Queens, New York, and we're going to visit her for Shabbos. So now you can ask any question you want, and I'm delighted to answer, and hopefully I will keep you all entertained.
Can I take you back a little bit, back to London, because you're obviously very famous for the Saatchi Shul, which has been now, you started it, didn't you?
I did.
And it's still going 20 years later or a lot more. How was it, and what were you most proud of it?
I had a friend, I started off my career in London as a rabbi, as the rabbi of a synagogue called Notting Hill Synagogue. I don't know if any of your viewers here remember Notting Hill Synagogue. There was a very curious character, wonderful man called Stuart Sharma, who ran Notting Hill Synagogue. And I'd left yeshiva, I'd gone to UCL, I was studying Jewish history, and I was looking for a bit of a gig on Shabbos to earn some money. And Stuart Sharma called me up and said, would you lane at Notting Hill Synagogue? And I came, and as I walked through the door, I met this man. He wore very bright red glasses, and he said to me, you look like you could say a Dvar Torah. I said, yeah, well, I was in yeshiva. He said, well, would you give us a Dvar Torah? I said, sure. He says, and what about singing? Are you a good chazan? I said, I'm not bad. I think I'm okay. He said, well, we'll ask you to daven Shachris and Musaf as well. So I davened Shachris and Musaf, I gave a drosha, and I laned. And I think I got Haftorah as well that week. So I did the full range of activities. And there I remained for a couple of years as the rabbi of Notting Hill Synagogue. And one of the members of Notting Hill Synagogue was a man called Michael Sinclair, who some of you may remember was the founder of Jewish Continuity, which was a very important organization at the launch period, during the launch period of Chief Rabbi Sachs' tenure as the chief rabbi. And Michael Sinclair, who was very fond of me, called me. At that time I was presenting the daily Jewish program on Spectrum Radio. Perhaps some of you used to listen to Spectrum Radio. He said to me, I know that you're a rabbi, and although you may be doing well as a Jewish radio presenter, by the way, I add parenthetically that he was very generous to say that, perhaps you would agree to start a synagogue for young Jewish professionals who have been disenfranchised from the Jewish community. And that was in 1998. We launched it with advertising on the Tube, in tube stations around the West End and St. John's Wood and Swiss Cottage and Kilburn, Maida Vale. And the first Shabbat, we had many hundreds of people attend. I was the rabbi there for 6 years. It was predominantly aimed at getting young Jewish people to come, congregate, meet each other, and get married. And within a few months of starting the shul, we used to have at least one engagement a month at the shul of people who met at the shul. That was the idea. I left in 2004, and it's continued. I don't know that it continues in the same mission, but it has continued to be a trailblazing shul now located in St. John's Wood Synagogue, and the rabbi is a wonderful man called Rabbi Mendel Cohen, and he leads the Saatchi congregation at St. John's Wood Shul. I think they daven at the Beit Midrash in St. John's Wood. It was a wonderful idea. It remains wonderful to enfranchise young Jewish professionals who are, in many instances, are not made to feel welcome in the mainstream shuls of Anglo Jewry.
So I was just looking to see if there are any questions. Flora made a Flora. I can't just make statements. Can you put questions through? I know you know Rabbi Pini, don't you? So if you can put a question on the chat show, and I'll call it out to you. You don't need to. You won't be able to do that. Okay. Changing the subject slightly. You're, as we read out before, you're renowned for your expertise in antiquarian books and manuscripts. What originally interested you in this field?
Well, I myself have always been interested in old books, particular books which are out of print. I know that in an age of Google Books and where everything is available online, in one way or another, people have forgotten that books are really books with paper between boards. But in the days when the internet wasn't known, I'm talking about 30 years ago, I used to buy books, mainly out of print books. And as a result, I got very friendly with a number of book dealers in London and introduced me to this whole world. It's a sort of parallel universe of book collectors, manuscript collectors, people who collect ephemera. And it is a fount of knowledge. We don't understand that to a certain extent, we don't understand that everything that we know is fed to us via the media with which we come into contact. So if you read a newspaper, or if you watch a TV program, or if you read a particular book, that's where you gain your information. But that information is very limited. It's just a sliver of information. And there's a wide range of information, of knowledge. When I say information, I mean knowledge, which is contained in books that you never come across and media which you never see. And I became more and more fascinated by archives and manuscripts and books, out of print books, which can give us a window into an incredible world that preceded us, that we know about. And particularly, I have interest in Jewish knowledge and the rabbis and communities, who flourished and who lived their lives and lived out their lives in all kinds of places that are of enormous importance to us in the way we live our lives. We don't know how much they have affected us in the way that we live our lives, simply because we're not familiar with their works. And so I started collecting books, and there's no such thing as a book collector, because every book collector is also a book dealer. You're dealing with dealers, and you end up buying some books and then selling them and buying new ones. And you start off buying cheaper books and you end up buying more expensive books. And you end up really becoming extremely knowledgeable in your chosen field of expertise. And it's like every aspect of commerce, because there's supply and there's demand. You can have something which is extremely rare, which nobody wants, and you can have something which is not that rare at all, but which lots of people want, and supply and demand will determine the price or the interest. And I have found over the years that many of the things which I have obtained, which are extremely rare, are of enormous interest to a very wide range of people. I started a series when COVID began. I was just saying when we were offline a little earlier before we began today that, the word COVID, think about it. A year ago, we'd never heard it. We'd never heard of coronavirus. And then come March, although we may have heard of coronavirus, suddenly it hit us all in the face and we were stuck at home. And one of the things I came up with, together with my team here in Beverly Hills, was a series of programs called Treasures from the Rabbi's Library. You can see a very small part of the Rabbi's Library behind me, but I have a collection of something like 15 or 20,000 books, manuscripts, and ephemeral material. And I thought to myself, you know what, rather than just sit here and do nothing, let me share some of those wonderful things with a wider audience. And we did a series. So far, we've done 10 treasures from the Rabbi's Library. We ended it in the summer. I'm about to begin again. On Sunday is a new episode of Treasures from the Rabbi's Library, and I'll be sharing new pieces from my library. Essentially, I'm taking pieces out of old boxes, dusty books and bits of paper, and telling you the history of those books, of those pieces of paper, sharing with you the background of what it represents and the stories of the people who wrote them or came up with them. I have a particular interest in polemics. Polemics are arguments, disputes. I don't know if you know this, but you know there's such a thing as collective nouns. Have you ever heard of collective noun? For example, there's a school of whales, right? Have you ever heard of a school of whales? So you can have a collective noun. What's the collective noun for rabbis? Does anyone know?
Rabbits?
It's an argument of rabbis. I invented that, but I'm sure it's true. And there are no two rabbis who can agree on anything. You ask a rabbi what day of the week it is, and then you ask another rabbi, they'll tell you something else. And I have collected any published or written material that is connected to a dispute between rabbis or within a community over the past several hundred years. I have a huge collection, of one of the largest private collections in the world of such material. And I thought that it would be of great interest to share this controversial material with as wide an audience as possible, that we should know that when we hear about an argument in our community, there's nothing different. There's nothing new. As we said just now in Kohelet, which we read on Sukkot, there's nothing new under the sun. Arguments are part of Jewish tradition, and we should know a little bit more about them. They energize us, and they make us think about what we stand for, and essentially, they are the central theme of any dynamic society or culture.
Are they all Jewish, some sort of Jewish connection?
I always make sure it's a Jewish connection. I'm particularly interested in the Orthodox community, although it's not limited to the Orthodox community. Sometimes there's disputes between the Orthodox and the Reform. And of course, there's differences of opinion between Zionists and non-Zionists, and that was in the last 100 years.
Sure.
But, the Jewish community has its a fair share of disputes, controversies, polemics, and disagreements. There's plenty of material. I could give this series of treasures from the Rabbi's library for the next 100 years and not run out of material.
Yeah. Okay. As we're on the subject of books, a couple of years ago, wasn't it? You published your first book, Mavericks, Mystics, and False Messiahs. Can you tell us a little bit about the book and if you have any other books in the pipeline?
Well, Mavericks, Mystics, and False Messiahs it started off as a series of articles in an LA Jewish newspaper, and I put it together as a book. There's many aspects of Jewish history which are not familiar to the wider community. For example, many people have heard of Shabtai Tzvi. He was a false messiah in the 17th century who led a popular movement. Many people believed that he was Mashiach and he was going to lead the Jewish people out of Galut, out of exile, and back to the Holy Land. But while everything I've just said may be familiar to those who are with us on this program, they don't know the details. And the details are fascinating because not only did Shabtai Tzvi have this, as it were, vision of himself as the Mashiach, he had followers, devout followers. And those devout followers continued to be acolytes of Shabtai Tzvi long after he died. He died about 10 years after he began his messianic campaign. He ended his messianic campaign when he converted to, of all religions, Islam, at the behest of the Sultan of Turkey. But many years later, there was a huge dispute in Hamburg, Germany, which spread across the Jewish world between a man called Rabbi Yaakov Emden and Rabbi Yonasan Ebershitz. Rabbi Yonasan Ebershitz had been appointed the chief rabbi of Hamburg, which was one of the preeminent communities of Europe. And Rabbi Yaakov Emden lived in Hamburg, and he accused Rabbi Ebershitz of being a Sabbatean, a follower of Shabtai Tzvi. This was in the 1750s. And this polemic continued, persisted for until Rabbi Ebershitz died, and even afterward he died in 1764. And I cover that dispute as well in the book Mavericks, Mystics, and False Messiahs. And there were fascinating characters in the Jewish community who dominated the people around them for a very short period of time. Flash in the pan, I believe, is the expression, and who perhaps didn't leave a lasting impression, but whose contribution to Jewish history is not something easily dismissed, and I felt that they should be covered in this book. The most fascinating of all the characters that I spoke about in the book was a man called Trebitsch Lincoln. And Trebitsch Lincoln was born in a Hungarian Orthodox Jewish family. He later converted to Christianity and became a missionary in Canada. He moved to the United Kingdom, to England, where he worked for the Rowntree family. You've heard of Rowntree. And he became the MP, an MP in the House of Parliament. He later was a spy for Germany. He moved to Germany during the First World War, and he led something called the Kapp Putsch. He was deeply involved in politics in Germany after the First World War, and ended his life as a Buddhist monk in Shanghai. That's one of the stories that I cover in Mavericks, Mystics, and False Messiahs. A fascinating character whose imprint is very limited, whose footprint, I should say, is very limited, and nevertheless is of great interest. And therefore, I felt that we should at least recount his story and retell it so that people can find out a little bit more about our wider Jewish history, not just limited to our own genealogical interests of, the family that we come from or the community that we belong to.
I some time ago, I read an article about Abraham Lincoln, and it was talking about he was Jewish, and it was a bit tenuous, but apparently his family came from Lincoln in England, of which there was a very big community in those times. And he then came over to America, and the rest is history. Have you ever heard that? I mean, whether it's true or not, I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting.
There's a book written by a member of my shul. His name is Ben Chappell. It's called Lincoln and the Jews. I'm sure it's available on Amazon, or you can Google it and find out where you can get it. It's a fabulous book, which contains all the information about Abraham Lincoln and his connections to the Jewish community of America, and particularly during the Civil War. Abraham Lincoln is my favorite president. I often quote him in my droshes, in my sermons that I give at shul. He was a fascinating character, a brilliant, absolutely brilliant politician, an inspiring leader. Not because he was so charismatic, by the way. He wasn't particularly charismatic. He wasn't a very good speaker. I know people often quote the Gettysburg Address, but he wasn't a particularly good speaker, but somebody who had a deep and profound understanding of the strategic overview of his country and of the world at large. I don't believe he was Jewish, but I do believe, like many of the founding fathers and later significant figures of the United States, that he had a deep appreciation of the people of the book and the deep appreciation of Jewish culture and Jewish history. And he was certainly a friend of the Jews.
But how many Jews were there in Lincoln times? There couldn't have been many Jews there, surely.
I would think a few 100,000 at most in the 80s.
Really? Well, that's quite a lot, isn't it?
But the first Secretary of the Treasury was a man called Salomon. He was during the time of George Washington. There's a statue of him here in Los Angeles. He was the one who invented the dollar, if you can believe it. He was Jewish. He died in his 40s. He was always in debt, of course, believed in capitalism. And he was the one who created the currency of the United States. He created the financial footing of the 13 colonies that seceded from the British Empire. And Jews have played a very prominent role in the creation, the formation, and the continued success of the United States since its founding in the 1770s.
Interesting. Right, I've got a couple of, if I can get to it, I've got a couple of questions from our congregation. The first one is from Oh, Peter and Silver Hartman. If you remember, she says, we remember you from the New West End Shawl when you were in Notting Hill. Do you remember the amazing Carlbad concert that you organised there? And then she said, and you organised it and you're staying with him on stage.
It's absolutely true. It was an amazing concert. It's actually available, I believe, although I haven't heard it for many years, as a recording. You can buy it. Shlomo Carlebach live in Notting Hill, Malava Malka in Notting Hill, I believe it's called. And it was in January 1993. He came for Shabbos. We spent Shabbos with him in Notting Hill. And we had a beautiful Shabbaton. And then on Motzei Shabbos, we had a Malava Malka, as it were, in the shul. Several hundred people came, and he sang and told stories. You can hear it. You can buy the recording. It's really wonderful. And of course, I remember the Hartmans. They were wonderful people. I believe he was the chazan at New West End Synagogue, and it really is special to hear from them. And thank you so much for asking that question.
Okay, I've got another one from somebody else that knows you, Flora Frank. Who doesn't know Flora? Yeah, she said Notting Hill Shawl. It wasn't my shawl, but we walked to Lauderdale Road, but I remember all the people mentioned. Do you recall the wedding of one of my students which officiated under the chuppah with a guitar? Everyone was bowled over.
I don't know which student she's talking about, but I can tell you I've done many chuppahs over the years with a guitar, and some of them took longer, some were shorter. But I thought that if it's a wedding, it should be spirited and should be happy and should, reflect the joy of the occasion. And what better way to reflect the joy of the occasion than to take out the guitar and sing a good song? And I got everyone singing, chosn and kala holding hands, and everyone dancing, and that's a wonderful feeling. A chuppah shouldn't be serious, it should be happy and joyful. Thank you, Flora, for asking that question and reminding me younger days.
I'm sure. Coming back to America, how does living and being a rabbi in Beverly Hills compare with a rabbi in London? And how does your English background inform your practice as a rabbi in Beverly Hills?
So I think that being a rabbi in the US is quite different. Being a professional rabbi, it's a profession. One of the first questions they asked me when I did my interview here at Beverly Hills was, can you read a balance sheet? Can you prepare a P&L? There were a lot of questions which I felt that my grandfather, when he got his job as the rabbi of the Adas Yisrael synagogue in Queen Elizabeth Walk, that he was not asked by the executive board of the Union of Hebrew Orthodox Congregations. But nevertheless, being a rabbi is in some ways different, but in many ways the same. You have to care about your congregants. You have to care about each individual. Every Jew matters. Every member of your shul matters. I recently celebrated my 50th birthday, and I received dozens of video messages congratulating me on that milestone birthday. And many of the people who, and of course they didn't confer among each other, who sent me messages, said how much they appreciated the fact that when they lost a loved one, that I had been in touch with them, and that I'd cared for them, and I'd taken care of all the details of whatever it was. Now, the truth is, I didn't think about it at the time. I wasn't doing it because I wanted their, devoted love. But I think that the role of a rabbi is to be there for people in their moments of joy and their moments of sadness. And I think that that's no different in the United States than it is in the United Kingdom or anywhere else in the Jewish world. The role of a rabbi is really to act as, in a sense, a glorified social worker and a representative of the Jewish faith in people's moments of joy and sadness. That's what we are here to do. And that's what I do in Beverly Hills, no different than I did it when I was a rabbi in London. And I'm sure that wherever I'm ever going to be a rabbi, that will be my role. in Beverly Hills in particular, it's wonderful to be a rabbi because the weather is so good. I mean, let's be honest. You've just had Sukkot in London, and it hasn't stopped raining. I told you earlier that my father used to say, whenever it was raining, any time of the year, he would always look out the window and say, raining, but it's not Sukkot. And the fact is that Sukkot wasn't invented for English weather, was it? And here in California, we have the most wonderful weather. And that certainly changes everything. I know I'm wearing a tie for this interview, but honestly, I never wear a tie. And everything is so casual and relaxed and laid back. We're in California, things are very, very different. And the community is very laid back and very gentle and not as intense, perhaps, as some of the communities in the UK. Of course, we have our politics, and I think that a Jewish community without politics wouldn't be a Jewish community. We want people to be engaged, and the way that they are engaged is if they complain that the rabbi spoke for too long and the chazan sang for too long, and the chulant wasn't hot as it should be during the kiddush, or whatever it is. And of course, we're in a little bit of a different situation right now. But when we get back to shul, I would look forward to all the complaints of those people who attend shul. It will be a wonderful reminder of what it means to be part of a large social group that is dedicated and devoted to the promotion of our culture and our history as Jews. That's what it means to be part of a community. I have to say that, and I've mentioned COVID already, but I want to focus on that for a moment. You know that we've had a very difficult few months all over the world. And I think this is for the first time ever in the history of humanity where everybody in the world has suffered equally. And sometimes it goes in ebbs and flows. Sometimes in one country it's more difficult, in another country it's easier, and then vice versa. But essentially we've all suffered the same. We've lost people or seen people become very ill who are beloved to us. And it's been a difficult time. We closed our shul in March. It was the week of Purim. We have not reopened. So that means for a very brief period, we were davening in shul for Shacharis during the week. But over the past few months, we have been praying on one of our members has a large tennis court at the back of his garden, and we've been davening there. And that's where we had services for Rosh Hashanah. We also had it, curiously enough, in the car park of the Mercedes-Benz dealership, which is next door to our shul. I'm sure that the irony is not lost on those people who have joined us here this evening. So the Mercedes-Benz was host to a Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur service. But the bottom line is that there's never been a moment in our lifetimes, I think, when community is more important. There's never been a moment when it's more important to reach out to those who are alone or in difficulty of some sort, of any sort, and to share a moment with them and to show that we care. And it's only because we are part of a community that is possible. We have members of our community who are on their own, widows, divorcees, and they have no one else but us. And we bring them food for Shabbos. By the way, this has nothing to do with money. This is not to do with whether you're wealthy or poor. Caring for another human being transcends wealth, transcends social status. It's so important to care for people. And of course, if you're part of a Jewish community, it becomes so much easier because you know who those people in need are. And you can give of your time and your resources to those people to make sure that they're not suffering in the midst of this extremely difficult and challenging time. And I know that in our community, it's been of huge importance and made a real impact. And we have seen and heard from people how important it has been that as a community, we get through this together and that we can be there for each other during this extremely difficult time.
Have you had people in your kahila that have been struck down?
So I have to tell you, and I know you're all going to laugh. Please don't laugh, but you may laugh anyway. That just before Rosh Hashanah, somebody came from Israel, and we had a little outbreak of COVID-19 in the Beverly Hills community. And guess who caught it? The rabbi and the chazan. On
Well,
Rosh Hashanah, it's hard to believe. I told you don't laugh. Did I say don't laugh?
yeah.
I was for Rosh Hashanah. I wasn't in shul. And the chazan wasn't in shul for Rosh Hashanah. Can you imagine? And we had two separate locations. So luckily, we have an emeritus rabbi who stepped in and who ran one of the locations, and two of our members were able to run the community for Rosh Hashanah. Thankfully, Chazan and I both tested negative before Yom Kippur, and we were able to preside over the Yom Kippur services. But we have been affected, I think you can say, by the fact that COVID-19 struck us at one of the most crucial times in the Jewish calendar. But I'm here to tell the tale. As you can tell, the ill effects of COVID haven't had a lasting impact on me. I will say this, that I do get a little tired from time to time. Hopefully narcolepsy won't hit me during this particular broadcast, and I won't fall asleep on you. But I do get tired in the afternoon occasionally. My memory is not quite as good because of COVID, and I have very vivid dreams. This is one of the side effects of the post-COVID, which is documented. You can Google it. And in my case, it meant that on one occasion I had a very, very detailed conversation, vivid, which I can remember, with the late Lubavitcher Rebbe, who I have to tell you was very gracious to me in my dream. I won't tell you everything he said. And the other thing is, I met quite a number of people in my dreams from my family who have long passed on. So I can't tell you much more about that, but I can tell you that COVID has affected our community.
Yeah, I was talking to a cousin of mine in Israel this morning, and they were saying that the Israelis have found out that if you've had COVID, the antibodies that are left in there do have an effect on you. And there's all sorts of things that he was saying, but it's not, I've had COVID and it's gone. It can take a long time, and the truth is nobody really knows. And that's the problem, isn't it? It's an unknown thing. Anyway, can we? David Lando wanted to have a question wherever he is.
Go ahead.
Hello,
Pleasure.
David. Is he still there?
David needs to unmute himself.
He's our chairman. He should know better. Hello.
Well,
all right. I'll come back in a minute. I've got another.
I see on the chat that Danny Wile's written to me that his mum is watching this together with him. So I want to send her warmest regards. She's Dutch, and my late mother was also Dutch. And I fondly remember our vacations, our holidays in Scheveningen many, many years ago in the 1970s, and sent her warmest regards and affection all the way from warm, sunny Los Angeles.
Very nice, very nice. Okay, I've got a serious question now from Nigel Levy, and he's saying, I wonder if you're prepared to comment on the forthcoming election, your election that is, I think, and if so, whether or not you're concerned that significant swathes of modern orthodoxy in the US and elsewhere appear in the extreme right-wing politics to define themselves principally on the basis of President Trump's pro-Israel policies.
So that's a very loaded question. It's a very important question, actually. And I'm pleased that somebody's asked it, and I do want to address it. I think it's important. I must, for full disclosure purposes and transparency, I have to tell you that President Trump visited our community last year. We had Friday night dinner with him at the home of one of our members. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. I have been to the White House twice during the Trump presidency for events, and it's been a real roller coaster the last 4 years. But I think that what we're seeing now in the election here in the United States is not a reflection of Trump. Trump is a symptom of a greater issue here in the United States, which is the very deep polarization between the left and the right. And we're seeing that same polarization in the Jewish community. And I want to explain to you what I mean, because I think it's important that people who don't live in the United States understand what's going on in the United States in the Jewish community. As a Jew in the United States, you have two options really in terms of your political direction, in a way that's completely different than anywhere else on the globe. And I want to, before I explain what that means, tell you about my experiences during my initial years in the United States. I started off as a senior faculty member at Yeshiva University High School. And I took a large group, 2-3 years in a row, of high school kids to Washington, D.C. for what's called the AIPAC Policy Conference. I don't know if you've ever heard of AIPAC. AIPAC is the America-Israel PAC, which is a lobbying group, which lobbies for what's known as the US-Israel relationship. I don't know if you're aware that military equipment that is supplied to the Israeli army principally, almost exclusively, comes from the United States. In fact, every single gun that is used by an Israeli soldier is from the United States and actually has on it a note which says, this is the property of the United States. And I think, I don't remember the exact sum, but it's somewhere between $3 and $4 billion a year is given to Israel for military equipment to support the US, as it's called, the US-Israel relationship, to ensure that Israel has a qualitative edge over its enemies, as they are referred to in this context, in the Middle East, that Israel would never be in a situation where it's at a disadvantage if it was caught in a war with its enemies. That is as a result of lobbying efforts by Jews and non-Jews in the United States to ensure that the United States continues to support Israel. AIPAC Policy Conference is an annual event that takes place in Washington, D.C., usually in the first week of March, where roughly between 15 and 20,000 people from across the United States converge on Washington, D.C., and to show their support for AIPAC, to show their support for those who lobby for the US-Israel relationship. It's a bipartisan event. That means Democrats and Republicans participate. And I have to tell you that such a thing wouldn't be possible in Europe. I can't go into details because I don't have enough time. It just wouldn't be possible to stage such an event, for example, in England. You know, if you think about it, to get all the major politicians of each party to come and speak at an event that's pro-Israel would be inconceivable in England, in the UK. And yet, you know, most congressmen, women, most senators, very often the president or vice president of the United States, the Secretary of State, members of cabinet, not only attend AIPAC Policy Conference, but they speak at AIPAC Policy Conference. And it's not a meaningless event because as a result of all the networking that happens, the state of Israel is stronger. Now, there are Jews who believe that their Jewish identity is so tied up with the security of the state of Israel that nothing else matters. I have to tell you, I fall into that group. That notwithstanding anything else that might be a consideration, I feel that the fact that there's 6.5 million Jews living in Israel is of such great importance to the future of my Jewish life that all other considerations pale into insignificance. That's the group I belong to. However, there are many Jews who believe that social justice, and particularly local social justice here in the United States, is more important than the security of the state of Israel. And they base their political views on that. That's not to say that they don't care about Israel, but it's not a priority. Now, you live in the UK, so you are not concerned. The truth is, even if the UK didn't support Israel, the future of Israel would not be in any doubt. It's not that important. So if a UK government, it would be uncomfortable for Jews in England and Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland, but it's not of crucial importance to Israel. However, if the United States didn't support the state of Israel, that would be of huge significance to the security and the future of the state of Israel. That being the case, who you vote for is extremely important. Now, if you're somebody who believes in social justice as a priority, then you're going to vote for social justice above Israel, which may mean right now, in this very difficult, decreasingly Israel supporting environment, that you will vote for the Democrats. And among the Democrats, there are those who are vociferously anti-Israel. Donald Trump, on the other hand, is somebody whose policies, if you're somebody who believes in social justice, you don't find it comfortable to support. So now you have to make a choice. What's more important? Do I identify with a pro-Israel president whose social policies I don't agree with? Or do I identify with a potential president, a prospective president like Joe Biden, whose pro-Israel policies are a little bit more wishy-washy, although I've met him and I heard him speak at an AIPAC policy conference, but his influences are rather different than the ones represented by Trump. Do I vote for such a president? Because my view is that social policy, for example, institutionalized racism, and I don't need to go into the details of what that means in the United States, institutionalized racism is something that's not being tackled by a Trump Republican administration, but will be addressed by a Biden administration. Do I vote for Biden? And because I know Biden quite likes Israel, I'm not too concerned about the future of the US-Israel relationship. That really is the choice for American Jews. There's 6 million American Jews, a lot of Jewish people. They have and many of them not only are wealthy, but are willing to contribute huge sums of money to causes and to people who they identify with. And so you've seen over the past, and I've watched it over the past 9 years that I've been here, a great divide, a gulf that has erupted, that has emerged between Jews who are much more minded to support social justice and social policies, and Jews whose primary concern is only the state of Israel, and they are willing to overlook any of Trump's extreme positions or associations as a result of the fact that they are only concerned for the future and for the security of the state of Israel. Now, I'm not going to tell you who I would vote for, and in any event, I don't have a vote because I'm not a citizen of the United States. However, there's no question that Donald Trump has changed the conversation for the Middle East. He moved the embassy, and that's what I wanted to address about, he came to speak at our shul. What he said, he told us a little bit about moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. It was a very amusing story. He said that he got a call from, no, he called David Friedman. He said to David Friedman, "I've decided I want to move the embassy." So David Friedman said, "Not a problem. What would you like me to do?" He said, "I want you to check out the cost, because the State Department is telling me it's going to cost $50 million to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And I want you to check that out. That number doesn't make sense to me." So David Friedman called him back. He's the ambassador, the American ambassador. He called him back a couple of days later. He says, "I've checked it out. And actually all we need to do is we need to make certain electronic changes, and we need to change the sign on the embassy. We need to create an office for the ambassador. It will cost us $100,000. Donald Trump told us at this dinner that he did for us Friday night last April, he said, "I have to tell you, it's the only time I've ever done it in my life." I told him, "David, it's too cheap. It's got to cost more money. It's embarrassing for us to move an embassy for $100,000. In the end, the embassy moved. It cost the United States $400,000. My friends, all that happened was they changed the sign on the consulate in Jerusalem from United States Consulate to United States Embassy. It is a perfect example of how impressions can make a difference, of how the intent behind that move is what changed the paradigm for the future of the Middle East. The fact that we now have peace with, Israel has peace with UAE and Dubai, and potentially in the next year or two with Riyadh, with Saudi Arabia, is only because Trump was willing to make that move. Now, make of it what you will, make of him what you will. That conversation is over. If Biden becomes the president, the embassy is not moving back to Tel Aviv, and UAE and Dubai are still going to remain at peace with Israel. That is Donald Trump. And you can make fun of him all you want. As a Jew, his impact on your life has been huge. And that is something that feeds in to the intent of those who are voting in the upcoming election. I know we don't have very long left, so I'm going to ask David for one last question, and then it will be my time to say goodbye.
Okay. I was actually very impressed that Trump had visited you out of, I don't know how many shuls you've got in America, but it's quite, I'm sure I'm not the only one. It's sort of, it's the equivalent of the Queen coming to Edgware, but I don't think we shouldn't start counting.
Yes, I won't go into a best dressed competition between him and the Queen, but we certainly had a wonderful time with Donald Trump at our shul. And in addition, I don't take any credit for this, but our shul raised $4 million for his re-election campaign.
Wow. Is that, I mean, it's a lot, but is that a lot in American language?
I think it's a considerable amount of money.
Mm.
And there's a lot more support for him in California than the media would have you know.
Oh, really?
Absolutely. But, you know, California, it's a numbers game. All democracy is a numbers game. And the vast majority of people in California are Democrats. But the Republicans, although they can't vote in a way that has an effect for Donald Trump, they can certainly contribute to Donald Trump or to the Republicans. And it's not just about Donald Trump, to the Republican Party, and make sure that the Republican Party remains strong financially in California, even though electorally it's not very strong.
Yeah, because I've got family in America, and you know, from my perspective here, my only consideration vis-a-vis America is Israel. I mean, that, you know, all the other problems that you've got there with unemployment and all the usual things that we've got here and going around the world, actually.
I'm an immigrant here in the United States, and I would say that some of the Republican immigration policies are intolerable. They've put so many barriers to entry for immigrants. This is an immigrant country. We need immigrants. We need people to come here and do, I hate to say it, some of those low-paid jobs that you know, American citizens don't want to do. it's a wonderful thing that we have immigration. So some of the anti-immigration policies of the Republican Party are reprehensible. However, for you, that doesn't make a difference because you live in the UK. You're only thinking about it in terms of the state of Israel. But for somebody here for whom social justice is hugely important, the Republican immigration policies are reprehensible to the point that they're willing to forego their support of Israel in order to vote for a Biden presidency. And they feel that Biden's support for Israel is not going to be that bad that it's going to matter. Do you see what I mean? That's the divide in American Jewry.
Okay, which one? I don't mean which one are you voting for? Who do you think will get in?
Oh, I don't know. I can't predict. You know that Sam Goldwyn is purported to have said, "I never prophesy, especially about the future." I would say that based on polls, it's highly unlikely that Donald Trump will win, but you can't trust the poll. I will say this, that both sides are prepared for a very contentious post-election debate about who the winner is. And I think that both people on the far right and people on the far left are willing to take to the streets. And I think early November is going to be a very difficult time for the United States. That's what I would say.
Yeah, no, I was quite surprised but pleased when you sort of threw in something about Biden and you said he was quite pro-Jewish, which I've never heard him talk about Israel or Jews or anything.
My impression of him when he spoke at the APEC policy conference and when I spoke to him personally is that he is certainly not anti-Israel and that he will do his best to continue with the US-Israel relationship. I'm not concerned about the future of that relationship, but the extent of it and the breadth of it and the depth of it, I think will differ if it's a Trump presidency or if it's a Biden presidency.
Yeah, okay. Have we got David? Have you got a question? You're muted. Hello? There you go.
Just one question, just relating to what you've been talking about in America, and obviously there are numerous people in America who happen to be married to Jewish people, and I actually believe that Joe Biden's daughter is married to a Jewish boy, and Kamala Harris is obviously married to somebody Jewish. I just wonder, with the rate of intermarriage in America at around 60%, how concerning that is. I don't know how bad it is on the West Coast, but I just wonder your thoughts on how to stem that, if at all possible.
So I'm going to answer briefly because I have to leave very shortly.
I'm aware of that.
The fact is that the United States, citizens of the United States, don't necessarily identify more closely with their ethnic origins than they do with their American citizenship. I think herein lies the fault. If somebody who's Jewish who, as it were, marries out, or somebody who's Christian who marries a Jew, is thinking American first and ethnic or religious identity second. In essence, for many of them, their ethnic or religious identity is so superficial that it makes no difference. But for us as Jews, we know that assimilation is very powerful, and within a generation or two of marrying out, those identifications have more or less diluted completely and they no longer exist. We must persist with Jewish education and with powerful Jewish leadership in terms of morality, mentorship, being strong in identifying with good causes and with the right ideals. And I think that, ultimately, we are able to prove in the marketplace of ideas that Judaism has a lot to offer and that being a Jew is extremely important if you are of Jewish origin. And we have, I've come across many in my community who have struggled with these issues. And I think that if they err on the side of Judaism, I wouldn't call it an error. Generally speaking, they're satisfied with the result. I thank you everyone for joining me this evening, and I'm extremely pleased to have been able to share a few thoughts with you. And thank you for those who invited me and who facilitated the event. And I look forward to being in touch with you again. You're all welcome to be in touch with me privately. My email address is pinidunner@gmail.com, pinidunner@gmail.com. I look forward to hearing from you, and thank you so much.
Have a safe flight.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. All the best.
Thank you. Thank you, Pini. It was very, very, very good. Very good. It was just as we're getting warm, but it always is.
Thank you. All the best to you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. We're closing down now. I thought, hello?
As I was saying, Joe Biden's daughter married a Jewish